Hey there, Phil Duke Jr. with Realty Executives. This is another episode of the Knowledge Round where we just take common real estate questions, give you some input, give you some things to think about when you're getting ready to move. So, today I want to talk about closing day. So, you found the house you want, or maybe you're trying to sell your house, and we've got to wait until closing day before you can officially move in or before the house is officially considered sold and it's officially done. So I get three questions over and over about this, so I'm going to cover these three. The first one is who's there on closing day? The way that it typically works in Alabama is that the buyer and the seller are both there at the same time on closing day, and we'll be in the room together. There will be, most of the time it's an attorney, will be overseeing the closing, making sure that every spot that needs a signature or an initial is signed or initialed and that everything's done correctly up to the standard that the bank wants. So usually on one side of the table you have the buyer, you have the buyer's agent if there's one involved, and you may have somebody from the bank. So whoever's doing the home loan may or may not be there, just depends. Then on the other side of the table you have the seller, you have the seller's agent if there's one involved. So there's several people in the room. The seller is not going to have a whole lot to sign. The buyer's going to be signing a lot. So if you're buying a house, just come ready, have your signature ready to go because you're going to be signing a lot. Once everything is done and the last thing is signed, they will verify that the wire transfer from the bank went through, and then it's officially considered sold. So what happens on closing day? So on closing day, really what we're mainly waiting on is to transfer the deed from the existing owner to the new one. That will have to be recorded after the closing, and they'll take care of that, and they will send it to the new buyer within usually 2 to 3 weeks after the closing. But the closing day is really where everything that we wrote in the contract and everything that we agreed upon on repairs is settled, and when we leave that day, there's nothing else that has to be done. The seller will get a settlement statement, so will the buyer. It will show how much money the buyer has to bring to closing. If they're having to pay closing costs, down payment, all that will be notated on there, and that's usually the first thing that we go over as soon as we get there. Most of the time we get that ahead of time so that we can review it before the closing, but sometimes we don't get it until the closing day. So if you've got a realtor who's going to the closing with you, they should be going over that closing statement with you and making sure that the numbers added up to what was in the contract. So, third question is when can I move? Or if you're selling the house, when do I have to be out? Technically, when the last piece of paper is signed and the wire transfer has been verified that it went through, technically the buyer can take possession of the property unless there's some kind of agreement. So there are pre-occupancy agreements that allow people to move into a house before closing. There's also post-occupancy agreements where if you sell your house, you may have a day or two or a week to get out. But most of the time, we don't see that. It makes everything a little bit nerve-wracking when you have those kind of agreements because the buyer's basically getting to test drive the house before they move in, or the seller may take their time getting out. So my recommendation is if you're selling your house, when you come to the closing, have everything packed up. If you've got to get a storage unit, do that. If you need to get a moving truck the day before, go ahead and have it loaded. A lot of people drive the moving truck to closing. They have it all loaded up. Once everything is done that day, then they go and move to the new house. So technically, once you sell the house, once you close on the house, if you're the seller, you've got to be out that day. You've got to be out before the closing is finished. So when you show up to closing, you've got to be completely out in most cases. The buyer, as soon as you are done signing the last document and you get the keys at the closing table, usually you're free to move in. So that's an overall summary of what happens on closing day, kind of what to expect. They typically take 30 to 45 minutes, and everything should be reviewed beforehand, but like I said, sometimes we don't get that settlement statement until we show up to the closing. So it's very important to look over that thing and make sure that the numbers add up the way that it was written into the contract back when you first received that offer or you wrote that offer. So that's closing day. If you have any questions about it, feel free to call, text, or email me about it.